Welcome to Animal Encounters. Today we're covering the dumbest animal attacks that has happened to people.
But we begin with a woman on a Montana trail sees a black bear with cubs and decides to scare it away instead of backing off. It was the 22nd of September, 2019, on a wooded trail outside a rural Montana community. The late afternoon was cool after light rain. Wet leaves covered the narrow path, and thick brush made it difficult to see around the bends. Elise Vera, 52, worked as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. Years of working around nervous dogs had taught her to stay calm around animals that barked, growled, and reacted unpredictably. But a wild bear was an entirely different situation. She and her longtime friend Marisol Hendry had gone out for an afternoon hike, something they did together most weekends. Black bears were known to move through the area in fall as they fed heavily before winter, but neither woman had ever encountered one this close. Around a bend, both women stopped short. An adult black bear stood roughly 40 feet up the trail. Then, Elise noticed two large cubs, low in the vegetation behind it. Marisol froze, gripping Elise's arm. The bear remained where it was. The cubs stayed in the brush and did not enter the trail. Instead of immediately increasing the distance, Elise began barking. Loud, sharp, deliberate barks, the kind she used on aggressive dogs at the clinic, paired with shouting and waving her arms. She seemed to believe that sounding aggressive and unpredictable would drive the bear off the way it worked on a difficult dog. Marisol urged her to stop and back away slowly instead.
This was not confidence. It was a bad read of an animal that had already shown them exactly why it needed space.
A mother bear does not have to be hunting or actively aggressive for a close encounter involving cubs and a strange, aggressive noise to become defensive. For several seconds, the bear held its position. Elise and Marisol still had room to move away, but Elise kept barking, and the bear showed no sign of retreating. Then the bear's posture changed. Female black bears can weigh well over 100 pounds and move remarkably quickly over short distances. When a mother is accompanied by older cubs, a sudden aggressive noise at close range can turn a defensive encounter chaotic very quickly. The mother bear rushed forward. Elise tried to back away, still barking, still waving her arms. Her boots slid on wet leaves near the sloping edge of the trail, and she fell hard onto the muddy ground. Marisol screamed for her to get up and started forward, but the mother bear was already closing the gap. That is the part that makes this so brutal. One ordinary slip turned a dangerous encounter into one she could not get away from. Before Elise could regain her footing, the mother bear reached her. It knocked her down and attacked at close range. Elise tried to curl toward the trail and shield herself, but the loose, wet leaves gave her no leverage to stand. Marisol grabbed a fallen branch and struck at the bear, shouting, trying to pull its attention away from her friend. The cubs emerged from the brush as the commotion intensified, staying close to their mother as she continued the attack. The mother remained over Elise for several seconds before finally backing away and turning toward the timber. Both cubs followed close behind. There was no prolonged chase through the forest. By the time she lost her footing, the distance between her and the bear had already collapsed. Even with Marisol right there trying to intervene, there was no way to turn back those first lost seconds. She did not need to go looking for danger. She only needed to stop treating distance and silence like something she could afford to waste. Marisol, badly shaken and with minor injuries of her own, ran to a stretch of trail with phone signal and called emergency services. Responders reached them, but Elise had already died from traumatic injuries sustained during the attack. Wildlife officers examined the area and found tracks, disturbed vegetation, and evidence consistent with an adult bear and two large cubs moving through the timber. Officers later observed an adult female black bear moving through the area with two older cubs. Marisol, the only witness, gave investigators a detailed account of what she'd seen: the sighting, Elise's shouting and barking, the bear's charge, and the fall on the wet leaves. Her description of the encounter, combined with the physical evidence at the scene, allowed officers to piece together how the attack had unfolded. Based on that account and the surrounding evidence, the encounter was considered consistent with a defensive attack involving a mother bear protecting her cubs. Officers noted that the shouting, barking, and close proximity may have contributed to the bear's escalation, though it's impossible to say for certain what drove the animal's response. She wasn't facing a monster. She was facing a wild animal defending its young, and on that slippery trail, the distance between them disappeared in seconds.
Next, we move to Kenya, where a tourist makes the dangerous mistake of leaving his vehicle for a closer photo of an elephant.
It was the 21st of June, 2016, on a dusty road outside outside a small village near the Amboseli region of Kenya. The morning heat had already dried the grass flat against the ground. Fine dust drifted across the road whenever the wind picked up. Melis Oduro, 44, worked as a hotel receptionist. On some days off, she joined informal wildlife drives with visitors and local drivers. She had seen elephants many times from inside vehicles. From that distance, they often looked calm. They moved slowly through the grass, crossed roads without rushing, and rarely reacted to people who stayed inside. That familiarity made her careless. That morning, the group stopped when they spotted a lone bull elephant feeding near the roadside. It was far enough away that no one inside the vehicle was in immediate danger. The driver kept the engine running and waited for the elephant to move on. Melis stepped out with her phone. She moved only a few feet from the vehicle at first. The elephant lifted its head, turned toward her, and stopped feeding. Its body faced her directly. It began walking in her direction with steady, deliberate steps. The driver called for Melis to get back inside. Instead, she backed away while holding up her phone, trying to keep the elephant visible behind her. This is the mistake that matters.
The elephant did not need to charge at first for the situation to be dangerous. Once it changed direction and began advancing,
Melis needed to return to the vehicle immediately. She paused near the rear of the vehicle and raised the phone for another photograph. The bull continued forward. Elephants are not props in a landscape. A person outside a vehicle is no longer part of the scenery. They become a separate, exposed presence on the ground. Adult African bull elephants can weigh between 10,000 and 14,000 pounds. Once an elephant begins advancing on a person at close range, the available reaction time can disappear quickly. The elephant suddenly accelerated, closing the distance faster than Melis expected. She turned and ran toward the nearest door, but she had moved too far from the vehicle. The loose dirt shifted beneath her shoes as she ran, and the road offered no cover or barrier between her and the bull. The driver repositioned the vehicle and shouted for her to get back inside, keeping the nearest door accessible to her. It was not enough. The bull reached her before she got there. It struck her with its head and shoulder, throwing her onto the hard roadside. Melis tried to push herself toward the vehicle, but the elephant was already over her. It trampled her, then moved several yards away and stood facing the vehicle, its body still turned toward the passengers inside. No one could safely leave the vehicle while the bull remained close. The driver kept the engine running and slowly backed away, keeping the doors shut and the other passengers inside. After a short time, the elephant turned toward the brush and walked away from the road.
the attack did not need to be complicated. The size difference alone meant Melis had almost no safety margin.
Once the elephant committed to the charge, the other passengers called for help from inside the vehicle. Local responders arrived soon after, but Melis Oduro had died from fatal crush injuries. Her phone was later recovered near the roadside. It was not publicly shared, and no recording was used in any public account of the incident. Witnesses confirmed only that Melis had exited the vehicle to take photographs and remained outside after the bull began moving toward her. Wildlife officers described the event as a fatal human-elephant encounter. The bull had not been pursued, and there was no claim that it was unusually aggressive. The circumstances were consistent with a person approaching too closely on foot and failing to return to the protection of the vehicle once the animal became alert. What makes this one hard to ignore is how small the first decision seemed. Melis stepped outside for one better picture and then stayed outside for one more. The next story moves from Kenya's dry roadside to the shores of Lake Naivasha, where a photographer spends days leaving food for a hippopotamus and mistakes repeated visits for trust. It was the 7th of August, 2017, near Lake Naivasha in Kenya. The morning was bright and dry, though a cool wind moved across the lake. Small fishing boats rested near the shore, and tall grass concealed parts of the muddy bank beyond the footpaths. Tavian Kessler, 38, was a freelance photographer who had spent several weeks documenting daily life around the lake. He had photographed hippopotamuses from a distance many times. One large hippo regularly surfaced near a popular fishing area during the early morning. At first, Tavian left scraps of fruit near the shoreline after breakfast. Then, he did it again a few days later. Soon, the hippo began appearing near the same stretch of bank where food had been left before. Tavian took that pattern as familiarity. Local fishermen saw it differently. They warned him that the hippo was returning to a place where it had learned food might be available. They also warned him not to stand close to the water, where the bank dropped sharply into deeper lake water. Tavian continued feeding it.
A hippo returning to one shoreline does not mean it recognizes or trusts a person.
It means that location has become associated with food. On the morning of the attack, Tavian carried pieces of melon in a plastic bag. The hippo surfaced roughly 30 feet offshore. Its eyes, ears, and nostrils were visible above the calm water. He tossed a piece toward the edge. The hippo moved closer. Tavian threw another piece near the waterline. The fisherman told him to step back, but he crouched near the muddy edge and held the final piece of fruit low over the water. The hippo kept advancing. The danger was not hidden. The animal was moving toward him, and Tavian was choosing to stay at the one place where he had trained it to expect food. Adult hippos can weigh several thousand pounds. They are highly dangerous near water, where they may react aggressively to a person who gets too close. Despite their size, they can move with sudden speed over short distances. The hippo surged from the shallows before Tavian could get back to higher ground. Its jaws clamped onto his lower body and knocked him into the mud. The plastic bag flew into the water, and pieces of melon scattered along the shoreline. Tavian tried to pull himself uphill, digging his hands into the wet ground, but the bank gave way beneath him. Each attempt to rise pushed him closer to the waterline instead of farther from it. The hippo moved forward again, its weight driving into the muddy edge beside him. Tavian was forced back toward the water as he tried to crawl sideways along the bank. The animal did not chase him across open ground. It stayed at the shoreline, where Tavian had already placed himself within reach. The fisherman shouted from a distance and threw stones toward the bank, trying to create enough noise to make the animal move away. They could see Tavian moving, but could not safely reach him. A direct attempt to pull him free would have put another person in the hippo's path. After several seconds, the hippo broke away and turned toward the lake. It remained in the shallows briefly, then disappeared into deeper water. This was not a wild animal becoming friendly and then changing its mind.
Tavian spent days reducing the distance between himself and an animal that should never have expected food from people.
The fisherman called for help, but Tavian Kessler had already died from catastrophic injuries caused during the attack. Wildlife officers later examined the shoreline and found fruit scattered near the bank, along with signs that hippos regularly used that section of water. They identified the repeated feeding as a major contributing factor, along with Tavian's decision to approach the shoreline. The lake edge was temporarily closed, and local guides repeated the warning given to visitors every year: do not feed wildlife, and never stand between a hippo and the water. Tavian did not make one impossible decision. He made a series of small ones that seemed harmless because the hippo had returned before and nothing had happened. The next story moves from Lake Naivasha to the Zambezi River, where a woman tries to prove crocodiles are afraid of people by swimming through water they already control. It was the 3rd of October, 2019, near the Zambezi River in Zambia. The afternoon was hot and clear. A broad stretch of shallow water extended from the bank before dropping into a darker central channel. The surface looked calm, but the current moved harder through the deeper section. Zelmira Nubby, 29, worked for a small adventure tour company near the river. She had heard warnings about crocodiles for years. She knew people were told not to enter the water outside safe, monitored areas. But she had watched boats pass through the river and seen local residents cross nearby shallows without an attack. Over time, she treated the danger as something that happened to other people. During an afternoon gathering, people near the bank began discussing whether crocodiles would approach a swimmer. Zelmira decided to cross the river herself. She stepped into the shallows and started toward the opposite bank. At first, the water reached only her knees. She could still feel the uneven riverbed beneath her feet. A few people watched from shore as she continued farther out. Then, she reached the darker water near the center. The bottom dropped away. The current pushed against her legs, and she had to begin swimming. A low movement appeared several yards away, then disappeared beneath the surface. Zelmira paused, but did not turn back. She splashed the water and continued toward the far bank, apparently believing the disturbance would make anything nearby retreat. The shallow water had felt safe, but the deeper channel changed everything.
She was now swimming where she couldn't see what moved below.
The surface settled again. Nile crocodiles can grow beyond 15 feet long and are powerful ambush predators. They may stay hidden beneath the surface for long periods, using murky water, current, and shoreline cover to close distance without being seen. A crocodile surged from the darker water beside Zelmira. Its jaws clamped onto her leg before she could react. The force spun her sideways and pulled her beneath the surface. Her arms broke through the water once as she tried to regain balance, but the current was already pushing her downstream while the crocodile dragged her away from the shallower section. People on the bank saw the water erupt around her, then turn violent as she disappeared. They ran along the shoreline, keeping pace with the disturbance, but the channel was too deep to enter safely. No one could reach her without moving into the same water where the crocodile had just struck. Zelmira briefly resurfaced farther downstream. She was several yards from the nearer bank and struggling against the current. She tried to turn toward the shallows, but the water kept carrying her along the deeper channel. The crocodile struck again before anyone could close the distance. It pulled her under, and the surface churned for several seconds before the movement drifted downstream and faded. From the bank, witnesses could see only broken ripples, muddy water, and the point point where Zelmira vanished beneath the river. The crocodile did not need to chase her across the river.
Zelmira had entered the water, moved into the deepest section, and placed herself within reach of an animal built to hunt from concealment.
Local searchers began looking along the riverbank that afternoon. Zelmira's remains were recovered downstream the following day. She died during the crocodile attack, with drowning also considered a likely contributing factor after she was pulled into the deep channel. Wildlife officials later warned that the crossing was unsafe and urged people to stay away from the river there. The danger had not been invisible. It had been part of the river long before Zelmira entered it. Zelmira stepped into the one place where the crocodile could stay hidden and strike without warning. Next, we move to Rajasthan, where a maintenance contractor mistakes a tiger near its enclosure bars for an invitation to touch it. It was the 19th of February, 2020, at a small private wildlife facility in Rajasthan, India. The afternoon was dry and bright. Heat pressed down on the concrete service paths, while the animal enclosures stayed cooler beneath their shaded roofs. Osric Boehner, 47, was an independent maintenance contractor. He had been hired to repair a leaking water line that supplied the washdown area beside a tiger enclosure. He had worked around the facility before, mostly on lights, pumps, and damaged fencing. His experience with animals came from domestic cats, and he often treated the tiger's quiet behavior as proof that it was predictable. That was the wrong lesson to take from a barrier. The enclosure held an adult Bengal tiger. It had been secured behind steel bars, with a waist-high safety rail several feet away to keep workers from approaching the enclosure wall. The facility's maintenance rules required contractors to remain behind that rail whenever an enclosure was occupied. Osric finished checking the water line and noticed the tiger standing near the front of its pen. It was not roaring. It was not pacing. It simply stood near the bars and watched the movement along the service path. Osric stepped over the safety rail. A second worker loading tools into a cart saw him move closer. Osric raised his hand toward the bars, then reached his arm through the gap, apparently trying to touch the tiger near its face.
A quiet tiger near an enclosure is not an inviting contact. It is still a wild predator inside a space designed to keep every part of a person out.
But Osric had already crossed the only boundary that mattered. A Bengal tiger has the strength to seize, pull, and hold a full-grown person against an enclosure barrier. Its jaws and forelimbs are built to control large prey, and steel bars do not make an exposed arm safe. The tiger struck without a long warning. Its jaws clamped around Osric's forearm, and it pulled hard against the steel bars. Osric was thrown forward into the enclosure wall. He tried to wrench himself backward, but the tiger kept its grip and dragged his arm deeper between the bars. As Osric twisted away, his arm caught against the edge of the steel opening. The bite and the force of the pull caused a severe injury high on his forearm. Blood began running quickly onto the concrete below him. The second worker reached the safety rail but could not safely grab Osric while his arm was still inside the enclosure. He shouted for help and struck the outer barrier with a tool, trying to distract the tiger without putting another person within reach. Osric fell sideways against the concrete. His free hand pressed against the ground as he tried to pull himself away, but the tiger's weight and leverage kept him pinned close to the bars. The tiger pulled once more, then held its position for several tense seconds. Additional staff arrived and began shouting and striking the outer enclosure from a safe distance. The tiger finally released its grip and moved toward the rear of the pen.
The tiger never escaped. Didn't need to. Osric had put part of his body inside the predator's reach, and that was enough.
Staff applied pressure to the injury and called for emergency transport. By the time Osric was freed from the enclosure, he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. He was transported for treatment, but damage to a major blood vessel and the resulting blood loss proved fatal. Osric Boehner was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The tiger remained secured throughout the incident. The facility closed the service path and installed a second fixed barrier farther from the bars, preventing maintenance workers from getting close enough to reach through. No footage was released publicly. Security cameras recorded parts of the service area, but the facility did not distribute video of a fatal incident. Witness accounts and the scene established the cause. Osric had stepped over a required safety rail and reached into an occupied tiger enclosure. Osric did not need to enter the cage for the cage to become dangerous. He only needed to decide the barrier was unnecessary, and a single exposed arm made that decision fatal. The next story moves from Rajasthan to a safari camp in northern Tanzania, where a cook sees a lion near the perimeter and decides she can drive it away herself. It was the 26th of May, 2018, near a small safari camp in northern Tanzania. Evening had settled over the grassland. The air was warm, the last light was fading behind the acacia trees, and cooking smells drifted from the camp's open kitchen toward the perimeter. Eudora Moyo, 56, worked as the camp cook. She had spent years seeing wildlife near the edge of the property. Antelope moved through the grass, hyenas sometimes called after dark. Lions had occasionally been seen near the access road. Those sightings had made her familiar with wildlife, but not safe around it. The camp had a basic wildlife safety procedure. When a dangerous animal appeared near the perimeter, staff were meant to move indoors and alert the guide responsible for wildlife incidents. That evening, an adult male lion appeared near the edge of the kitchen area. It stood beyond the open ground between the storage shed and the cooking shelter. The animal may have been attracted by food smells or activity around the camp, but it had not entered the camp itself. A staff member noticed it and immediately began moving people indoors. Eudora picked up a long metal cooking utensil and walked toward the lion instead. She raised it over her head and shouted, trying to drive the animal back into the grass. The lion remained where it was, facing her. Eudora continued forward across the uneven ground near the perimeter.
This is where familiarity became dangerous. Seeing lions near a camp does not make them part of the camp.
It means the camp is built inside their environment. The lion did not retreat as Eudora approached. It watched her movements with its head low and its body facing directly toward her. Staff near the kitchen signaled for her to return, but she kept waving the utensil and closing the distance. Adult male African lions can weigh more than 400 pounds. They can cover short distances with explosive speed, and someone on foot has very little time to react once a lion charges at close range. The lion moved forward suddenly. Eudora turned toward the kitchen buildings, but her foot caught in a shallow rut in the hard ground. She fell before she could reach the nearest doorway. The metal utensil slipped from her hand and landed several feet away in the dirt. The lion reached her within seconds. It struck Eudora from behind and drove her flat against the ground. The impact knocked the air from her as she tried to roll toward the shelter. She reached for the ground and tried to pull herself forward, but the lion stayed over her, cutting off the path back to the doorway. It bit her at close range and pulled her away from the open walkway. Eudora's hands clawed at the hard dirt as the lion dragged her a short distance toward the grass beside the camp. The animal released briefly, repositioned, and remained close as she tried to move again. From the kitchen, staff could see the utensil lying in the dirt and Eudora near the edge of the camp lights, but the lion's position made it impossible for anyone to reach her safely. They shut the door, then began shouting and striking metal cookware against the walls from behind the shelter. A staff member called the guide responsible for wildlife incidents while another kept watch from a protected position. Eudora remained on the ground near the edge of the light from the kitchen. The lion held its position over her briefly, then pulled away as the noise and activity continued from the buildings. It moved toward the grassland and disappeared beyond the camp perimeter.
The utensil never gave Eudora control of the encounter. Once she walked toward the lion alone,
she gave up the distance that had protected everyone else. Staff contacted a wildlife response team immediately, but by the time trained personnel reached the camp, Eudora Moyo had already died from the injuries sustained during the attack. The camp suspended evening activity while staff reviewed its wildlife procedure. Workers were reminded that sightings near the property had to be reported from shelter, never confronted on foot. Eudora had spent years watching lions remain outside the camp. One night, she mistook that distance for something she could control. The next story moves from Tanzania to the farmland of Maharashtra, where an electrical technician follows what he believes is an injured leopard into tall grass after dark. It was the 6th of December, 2021, outside a farming village in Maharashtra, India. The last daylight had faded behind the fields. Damp air hung over the low ground after earlier rain, and tall grass along the field boundary had become almost black in the dark. Vahezan Kiros, 41, was an electrical technician who repaired power lines and small equipment in rural communities. He had heard about leopards moving through farmland and occasionally taking livestock, but he had never seen one up close. That evening, villagers gathered near a field after someone reported a leopard moving along the edge of the crops. Most people stayed near the road, watching from a distance. Vahezan did not leave with them. He saw the leopard briefly near a patch of tall grass. It moved low along the field boundary, then disappeared into the vegetation. Vahezan assumed that an animal which did not flee into the open must have been injured. He took out out a flashlight and followed the direction it had gone. Several villagers told him not to enter the grass. They knew the leopard was somewhere ahead, but nobody could see exactly where. Vahezin kept moving, sweeping the beam across wet leaves, brush, and the narrow path between the fields.
A leopard disappearing into cover is not proof that it is helpless. It means the person following it has lost the ability to judge where it is.
The grass grew thicker as he moved farther from the road. The flashlight caught broken stalks and muddy tracks, but the narrow beam left wide sections of the field edge in darkness. Vahezin called out and pushed deeper into the vegetation. He saw movement several yards ahead and stepped toward it. He did not know how close the leopard was, or whether it had stayed in the same place after entering the grass. Indian leopards generally avoid people, but a leopard surprised at close range can react defensively, especially when dense vegetation leaves limited room to retreat. Adult males can weigh more than 100 pounds and can strike with extreme speed over a short distance. The leopard came out of the grass from Vahezin's side. It hit him before he could turn fully toward it. The flashlight dropped from his hand and landed in the mud, its beam swinging across the grass in short, uneven flashes. Vahezin fell backward onto the narrow path, striking the wet ground before he could regain his balance. The leopard stayed close, biting and clawing as Vahezin tried to shield his head and push himself away. He tried to turn toward the road, but the grass caught around his legs and the muddy ground shifted beneath his hands. For a moment, the flashlight beam pointed directly into the grass, then rolled away. The light disappeared behind leaves and mud, leaving most of the field boundary in darkness. Vahezin attempted to crawl back along the path, but he could not see where he was going. The leopard remained close, moving through the grass beside him and striking again whenever he tried to rise. The sounds carried to the road, but the thick vegetation hid both Vahezin and the animal from anyone standing outside it. Villagers heard the sudden noise from the field edge and moved toward the sound, but they stopped when they realized the leopard was still somewhere in the vegetation. From the edge of the grass, they could see only the flashlight lying in the mud and the plants moving in the darkness. The danger did not come from the leopard chasing him across the village.
It came from Vahezin walking into dense cover after dark, where the animal could be closer than he realized before either of them had room to get away.
Wildlife personnel arrived later that night and searched the field boundary from a safer distance. The disturbed grass showed that the struggle had continued deeper into the vegetation. Vahezin Kiros was found several hours later. He had died from traumatic injuries sustained during the attack. The area was monitored afterward, and residents were warned not to track, corner, or follow a leopard sighting on foot, especially after dark. The immediate evidence was the flashlight Vahezin dropped in the disturbed vegetation around the path.
If you liked today's episode, why don't you go ahead and smash that like button? You want to comment, talk about your favorite part? Cool, I want to talk about it with you. Go ahead and comment below, and for the love of God, subscribe. Why have you not subscribed yet? See you next time.